Photography is so much more than merely taking pictures. Around 2010, I was invited to the Christmas do of Panos, the London photo agency. My partner was a member and I was her plus one. I was seated next to a kind of gnarly looking war photographer, and I thought I'd get things off to a friendly start. So I said to him, "Hi, I'm Harry." And he said, with a snarl, "I know who you are. You photograph famous people." On reflection, that little incident had a big effect on me. It was always there in the back of my mind and probably galvanized me to do more personal projects. In the moment, I said to him, "No, I document the cultural landscape." And that phrase that sort of popped into my head as a rebuttal has kind of stayed with me. And actually, I think very accurately describes what I do. And it's something I've been pondering this last week when two of my subjects passed, Sven-Göran Eriksson and Mike Lynch. Mike Lynch went down in his super yacht in the Sicilian waters in a storm. And of course, Sven-Göran Eriksson was the England football manager during the golden generation of Rooney, Beckham, Scholes et al. Lynch was a commission from the National Portrait Gallery, and his portrait was one of 24 prints that comprised my first solo exhibition at the gallery. I got the gig because I already had a huge archive of business portraits. I'd taken them for Fortune, Forbes, and most notably, Management Today. Anne Braben, the art director of the magazine, designed the main interview around a monthly portrait which I would do. This is something that, as a young photographer, you want, a regular assignment, something that helps you keep the wolf from the door, and also, as a side issue, helps you build up a body of work. The exhibition, sponsored by Deloitte, was far from a conventional opening. I think Deloitte realised this was an opportunity for networking. So instead of a sort of boozy affair where all and sundry were kind of milling around, it was actually a dinner in the gallery surrounded by my portraits. And at the dinner was Sir Terry Leahy, the head of Tesco, Lord Brown, the head of BP. It was most peculiar, but very memorable. I don't know if Mike Lynch attended this soiree, but I do remember driving up to Cambridge to do his portrait. In the weeds, at the back of what appeared to be a porter cabin, Lynch was friendly and patient, and he let me take my pictures. Looking at them now, it's a far cry from the tech titan that he would become, Britain's Bill Gates. The company that he'd been working on, that he'd founded when I photographed him, Autonomy, would eventually be sold to Hewlett-Packard for $12 billion. I used Kodak Portrait and my Hasselblad, and interestingly, something else that I've not really talked about, which was a fantastic camera, I'm not sure if you can still get the film, perhaps somebody can answer that, was a Polaroid 195. It was a completely manual Polaroid camera, so you could adjust the shutter speed and the aperture, and I loved using that camera. The film was called Type 55, but I'm not sure if it wasn't called something else because it was slightly smaller format. It wasn't 5:4. But the great thing about it was that we would produce a print which you'd peel off. You could give it to your subject or keep it for a record as a contact, and then it would give you a negative. The negative was all kind of covered in gunk and paper and stuff, and you'd have to sort of put it in immediately into a little negative holder in a bucket of water with sodium sulfite dissolved in it, which would clean it and clear it and keep it until you could get it home, wash it and dry it. The negatives were very high resolution. They were quite low ASA, but they were a little bit fragile, but they had lovely tonal quality. The first time I photographed Sven-Göran Eriksson, the England football manager, it was with his sidekick, Tord Grip. It was at the Football Association, and it was commissioned by Elmwood, a design company. It was another example of an ongoing working relationship. The previous year, I photographed Kevin Keegan for them. He was Sven's predecessor, and it was at the Football Association. And I remember Kevin really wanted us to do heading tennis. I think it was his party trick. So we were all heading the ball back to him and he would head it back to us. At the time, there'd been some footage of Tony Blair doing it with him, and I'd assumed that Tony Blair was really good at football, but then you realise it's Kevin who's good at football, because he sort of would flick the ball up so it would always arrive at the perfect spot for you to head it back to him. Everybody had a go. The secretaries at the FA, Seamus, my assistant, everybody. And then at the end, he's on the Football Association headed note paper, he would give us a sort of signed document to confirm the number of keepy-uppies that we'd achieved. The second shoot I did with Sven was different. It was an editorial shoot. It was for Men's Health. As is often the case, commercial shoots for company reports, advertising, they're very highly prescriptive. And with editorial, you can kind of do what you want. It was one of my first digital shoots and shot on a Canon 1DS. It was a time of transition, and for a brief period, including this shoot, I carried around 2 camera bags, analog and digital, and shot on both. So after some conventional portraits, you give the magazine what they want, something simple and strong. Against a red wall, I used a softbox and a studio light. I spotted a model of the soon-to-be-built Wembley Stadium with the arch. And I thought, time to play with some scale. I was almost certainly influenced by the Big Tie series. Brian Griffin's extraordinary set of pictures that were made during the development of the Broadgate Centre in the City of London during the 80s. We'll put a link. Brian died this year and leaves a big hole in the photographic world. He was daring and brilliant and a technical virtuoso. I mean, extraordinary, a kind of corporate Guy Borden. I don't think those pictures worked as well as they might have. You can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. You just do your best on the day. The model of the stadium was actually in a Perspex box, so it was quite difficult to light. Sven wasn't going to give me very much time. And I think most importantly, if the model had been coloured in rather than white, I would have been able to successfully mess around with the sort of scale, and it would have been more convincing visually. But you do your best on the day. Being a celebrity portrait photographer, you're a bit like a cork being tossed around in the sea of who happens to commission you. So a year later, the random people generator that is the magazine industry decrees that I get to photograph Nancy Dell'Olio. She's a racy Italian lawyer and Sven's significant other. She insists that a few days before we do the shoot, we meet up, have a coffee to determine whether there is chemistry. In my experience, the demands of a subject are in inverse proportion to their fame. But she was perfectly nice, and looking at the shoot now, I went back to film and shot an extravagant 20 rolls. I watched her on Sven's excellent documentary about his life on Amazon Prime. He was obviously a flawed individual, but who isn't? His life story is extraordinary, and his courage and stoicism in the face of his imminent death is profound and moving. My mum also died earlier this year. And when someone dies, it's a reminder that life is finite and precious. And most of the time we live our lives oblivious to this fact. With photography, we are literally capturing moments in time, fixing, preserving artifacts that can live on after our demise. And that's why photography is so much more than merely taking pictures.